Should we start? Okay, are you ready, Philip? Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this edition of the NITheCS Colloquium. My name is Francesco Petruccione. I'm the director of NITheCS. And before I introduce to you the speaker, I just wanted to apologize because we just moved our colloquium back to the NILSE. This is the first attempt in the new renovated NILSE. And as you can imagine, once something gets renovated, not everything was like it was before. Yeah, so there are still some, maybe some little audio issues to sort out, and hopefully everything will work out smoothly. Today's speaker is Philip Southey.
Southey, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, and he's a lecturer in Stellenbosch. Yeah. I'm not so sure whether he's a physicist that moonlights as a philosopher or a philosopher who earns his living as a physicist, but maybe we will find out in the course of the talk. And I'm very glad that we managed again to get a little bit less scientific in our talks, and hopefully we'll have more talks like this going forward. So Philip, thank you very much for offering to give a talk with what seems to be very nice slides. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. I forgot to ask your permission if I can hold your hand later. I'm going to ask you to raise your arm. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. As long as you don't bite me.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Yeah, it's lovely to see we have people from the philosophy faculty, department and physics here. I am Dr. Philip Southey. I do lecture at in Stellenbosch in the physics department. My English students call me Dr. Phil, and my Afrikaans students call me Dr. Southey, which I quite like. So I did a degree in astrophysics, and then I had a quarter-life crisis and did a second degree in philosophy. And then I came back to South Africa, to UCT, and did a PhD in physics education, where I sort of managed to put some philosophy of language in the cognitive linguistic framework that I was using in physics education. All right. Yeah, we're having technical difficulties, so we couldn't get the... more technical difficulties. It says, okay. Cool, thank you. Can we just do this quickly? Can you guys just vote with your fingers? Yeah. So if you strongly believe that we have free will, in the sense that it's possible for us to do otherwise, just give me a 5. And if you definitely think we're determined or random fluctuations, give me a 1. Yeah. Just show me with your fingers. What do you guys think? Just have a knee jerk. Wow, okay, you're averaging around about 3.5, 4, but they're 1s and they're 5s. That's fantastic. All right, let's try that again. Thank you very much for telling me the record is in progress. Do you believe that scientific progress means that we are getting closer and closer to the true nature of reality? 5, absolutely. 1, definitely not. Okay, nice. So you can vote in the chats if you want as well, but you're averaging once again about a 3.5. Interesting. Okay. But if you think that scientific progress is getting closer and closer to the true nature of reality, do you think we can reach an end point? Do you think we can reach a grand unified theory? Absolutely. It's imminent. Well, okay, it'll come at some stage. All right. And that's always interesting. When I've done this before, we've fallen down to an average of about 1.5. Yeah? Interesting. So you all think that we are heading towards something, but we're never going to get there. Fantastic. All right. Okay. Are you getting an echo there, Henk? Oh, that's going to be a problem for the people at home. Okay. So just, I'm going to continue. Henk will sort me out. To look at, it's a little cute historical moment in terms of reaching an endpoint. Yeah? Lord Kelvin in 1900 thought that we were there. He said, there is nothing new to be discovered in physics now. All that remains is more and more precise measurement. So if history repeats itself, there might be someone saying that, but most people in this room feel that we are not going to arrive at an endpoint. The next person that I'm going to pop up is Richard Rorty. So Wittgenstein is the love of my life. philosophically speaking. And then after that is Richard Rorty. He's a pragmatist, but very much influenced by Wittgenstein. So there's a very clear line from Wittgenstein to Richard Rorty. And his philosophy is known as pragmatism. So he's going to talk about the philosophical view from a pragmatist point of view in a moment. Thanks, that'll be great. I appreciate it. There he is. Richard Rorty. He visited Stellenbosch, JP, in 2013 or something.
1999, and that was the second time.
Wow, 99. So, and you were here?
I was an honor student, that's why I remember the exact.
Okay, wow. So JP was here when Richard Rorty visited in 99. Let's see if we can get him. That's fine for that view for me.
100%.
Cool.
Screen sharing sound.
And in a moment, I'm also going to mention Jacques Derrida. And just to be clear, so Derrida and Wittgenstein, well, actually, Minke, Derrida and Wittgenstein, how closely related on a scale from 1 to 10? Depends who you ask. Say again?
No, they're not close.
Great. Okay. Thanks. It's wonderful to have it's wonderful and terrible to have experts in the room, because you always know that the people know more about what you're speaking about than you as you move through from physics to philosophy. So Minka Voerman is in the philosophy department. She's very interested in Derrida. So there's no direct line, but are you happy if I call Derrida an anti-foundationalist? Nice. Okay. Even more complicated. Thanks, Minka. All right.
I'm disconnected, so I need to connect you to the Wi-Fi. On it.
Oh, wow.
Hold on a sec. I'm just connecting.
Okay, sorry.
One.
Okay. All right, my Wi-Fi has gone down. Sorry, the other little joke that I was going to make at the beginning, this is not boding well, is that as you can tell from the title of the talk, I got way too excited about the topic, and I was going to tell Francesca if we can do a weekend workshop. I've got more than enough slides, so I'm going to try and trace a line now. I just had to slash and slash, so I'm not going to say as much as I wanted to say, but I consoled myself and said if I can just plant a Wittgensteinian seed, I think then the work will be done. So hopefully by the end of today we'll do that. Yeah. Wow.
And then someone asked him, what do you think of Wittgenstein? And he said, I cannot dance with him.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah. So there's a book written by Henry Staten called Wittgenstein and Derrida, which I've sort of dipped into. And Derrida does write a little review, and he says, this is interesting. I'm sure there's more possibility for work here, but not very enthusiastic, interestingly. Yeah.
Greek idea is that.
Cool, thanks, Hank. Yeah.
So you're not performing anything today?
Should I start doing some one-handed handstand? Yingshe Ma is Cosmola. I'm going to gesture towards you later, Yingshe, when we speak about finding the center of the universe. He's witnessed me doing some break dancing before, and he constantly reminds that he wants to see more. But I don't think this is the time or the place. Fantastic. There we go.
Stop that for you. It should work now.
Great. Thank you.
There's a network issue and then a sound issue.
Cool. Yeah, no break dancing or bagpipes today. And can I don't seem to have a cursor now. Oh, thank you.
Are you on the wrong one? Are you on presenter view?
Apparently. but it's fine. I think I'll manage from here. All right, let's listen to what Richard Rorty has to say about the idea of achieving the end goal. I think you are going to be in agreement with him.
Greek idea is that at a certain point in the process of inquiry, you come to rest because you reach the goal. And the pragmatists are saying, we haven't the slightest idea what it would be like to reach the goal. The idea that the aim of inquiry is, conformity to correspondence to reality, or seeing the face of God, or substituting facts for interpretations, is one that we just can't make any use of. All we really know about is how to exchange justifications of our beliefs and desires with other human beings, and as far as we can see, that will be what human life will be like forever.
So a lovely controversial phrase that he's quoting Nietzsche. There are no facts, only interpretations, but very much this idea that there's no resting point that we aiming for. Oh goodness, everything is just off slide. Okay, the free will conundrum is what it says at the top there. So can everyone put out their hands in front of you, please? Stick out your hand. All right, and in the next 5 seconds, Francesco, can I use you as well? Fantastic. And in the next 5 seconds, if you choose to, can you raise your hand as though you're answering a question? Right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fantastic. Okay, so everyone chose to raise their hands. There we go, thank you, Francesco. Right, so it's very obvious what happened here. Yeah? You guys obviously chose to raise your arms, and Francesco had his arm raised for him. Yeah? I took away his free will for a moment. But for me, an exercise like this shows it's very obvious that we have free will, and we can see what it means not to have free will. But if you're a good scientist, you know that when you raised your arm, something happened in your brain, particularly in your motor cortex. It sent a signal down the nerve cell to help your muscles contract for your arm to move. So there was a particular neural state that occurred. Yeah? And if you're a good scientist, you know that any state has an antecedent cause. So something caused the brain state that caused your arm to go up. And that antecedent state also had an antecedent state. Yeah? And so we get into this notion of natural law. Yeah? If you think that the universe is governed by natural law, you're thinking of events toppling over like they are dominoes. Let's just get something out of the way very quickly. Even if there is quantum randomness in there, that doesn't help us with free will. So there might be an element of randomness, but that doesn't give us free will. And if you're a scientist and you think that somehow, while the universe is evolving, you get to insert yourself and direct the dominoes to fall in a top way, which would be your arm raising, that's almost as though you're putting yourself in there as a type of divinity. Yeah? You're interfering with the natural law. For a moment, you get to play God. So according to that view, the view which a scientist must take if they think that the universe is governed by natural law, it's obvious that we don't have free will. Okay? So it's obvious that we do have free will, and it's obvious that we don't have free will, which is why I love this conundrum. Okay? By the end of the talk, just to give a little spoiler, okay, the way that I'm going to resolve this conundrum is to say, yeah, no, that's fine, just don't worry about it too much, all right? Okay? So the resolving of the paradox, just get ready. Wittgensteinian philosophy, there's often this sense of deflation, a little bit of disappointment. So you can look forward to that at the end of the talk. Lovely quote from another Wittgensteinian, or someone heavily influenced by Wittgenstein, John McDowell, says that we want to achieve an intellectual right to shrug our shoulders. Wow, so there's a serious paradox about whether we have free will or not. Okay, yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it. We live with it, yeah? But we want an intellectual right to do that, which is what this talk is about. Just to give you a feeling of what dissolving the paradox might look like, the solid table conundrum, can you guys just vote? And please, if a few people need to be smart asses in order for this to work. But if you think that the table is solid, please put up your hand. Okay, you don't all have to be smart asses. Yeah? Okay, some people say the table is solid, and the people who say the table is not solid, thank you very much. So if we zoom into the table and we look at the atomic structure of the table, we know that the diameter of the nucleus is about a femtometer, 5 orders of magnitude smaller than where the electrons are orbiting. So if you go 4/3 pi cubed, if you're going to a volume, you can work out that in fact that atom is it's basically empty space. Yeah? So not solid at all. Yeah? So we've just had a description to show, but I bump into the table, right? I mean, it's a solid object, I can bang it. So it's obvious that the table is solid, and it's very obvious that the table is not solid. We have a conundrum. Who stays awake at night worrying about that? Okay, you can feel we can live with paradoxes. All right, Wittgenstein's job, philosophical job, is about dissolving, not solving problems. His later work is the Philosophical Investigations. The motto, yeah, so when you open the book, the quote he uses to open the book is, "The trouble about progress is that it always looks much greater than it really is." And that can happen when you're reading Wittgenstein. Sometimes you feel like you have this moment of insight that is blinding. You think you understand everything in the world, and there's this, oh, is that it? Yeah. So very much part of his philosophy is this sense of disappointment. One of my favorite quotes, "The results of philosophy are the uncovering of the bumps that the understanding has got by running its head up against the limits of language." So he's a philosopher of language. Language is going to play a central role here. Fascinating character. Let's see if I can get the... so he was originally an engineer, worked on propeller design, didn't work out, became interested in the philosophy of mathematics and went to Cambridge and famously went to Bertrand Russell and said, "I need to know whether you think I can work."
And his notions seemed me odd, so that for a whole term I could not make up my mind whether he was a man of genius or merely an eccentric.
That's the voice of Bertrand Russell, which is pretty cool. So Wittgenstein went there and Russell made up his mind, yeah, because Wittgenstein wrote the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, most of which he wrote in the trenches of the First World War at the front line and in a prisoner of war camp. He finished it, submitted it as his thesis, and Russell hailed that as one of the most remarkable works of philosophy and thought that it had solved the problems of logic in philosophy. The most famous biography by Ray Monk, you can see the subtitle there, The Duty of Genius. Okay. After he finished the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, Wittgenstein left academia. He became an assistant gardener in a monastery. He then became an elementary school teacher in Vienna. Apparently he was awful. He was trying to teach integral calculus to 7-year-olds. Left all of that and came back to philosophy because he thought that his original work, that there was something that needed to be changed. He got something fundamentally wrong. So if you go to Oxford, you can study a course called the early Wittgenstein, and you can study a course called the later Wittgenstein. Yeah? There's a way to see these as diametrically opposed to each other. But look what Russell says about the later Wittgenstein. Philosophical Investigations was never published. It was published posthumously. So Wittgenstein never reached that end point where he thought he was completely comfortable with his later thought. But this is what Russell thought about his later thought. The earlier Wittgenstein, whom I knew intimately, was a man addicted to passionately intense thinking, profoundly aware of difficult problems of which I, like him, felt the importance and possessed, or at least so I thought, of true philosophical genius. The later Wittgenstein, on the contrary, seems to have grown tired of serious thinking and to have invented a doctrine which would make such an activity unnecessary. The vitriol. Yeah, there's emotion in that sentence. Another quote from Russell, Wittgenstein threw away this talent and debased himself before common sense. What on earth happened there? The genius said, I got something wrong. Here's a new way of looking at things. And there's other people who are saying, no, you definitely, we don't want to look at your later work. I'm fascinated by this emotional component of these type of issues. And I think one of the reasons why it gets people's emotions going is because you can think of Wittgenstein as an anti-foundationalist. Yeah? So that says anti-foundationalism, Rorty sometimes says anti-authoritarian, anti-essentialist. So the sense of having the rug pulled from out from under you, yeah? Another famous philosopher who could be associated with that, as Mika said, but not strictly, would be Jacques Derrida. There's something called the Cambridge Affair, when Cambridge was going to give him an honorary doctorate, and a whole lot of philosophers threw their toys, yeah? Arguably one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, and a very well-respected philosopher such as John Searle. This is what John Searle has to say about Derrida. If I can, here we go. So John Searle's going to speak about deconstruction. When you hear deconstruction, that's Derrida, yeah? So this is what John Searle has to say.
And not the other way around. But it's also in the contemporary people, in the deconstructionists and the ethno-methodologists and all that sort of nonsense.
All this sort of nonsense, completely dismissive. Yeah? So a well-respected, well-credited philosopher thinks that way, and there are also some not so well-credited people that also have things to say about Derrida. Here we go.
The thing about the postmodernists, and I'm going to mostly about Derrida, because I'll consider him the central villain.
Consider him the central villain. I love that. That was just to make my talk a little controversial. Okay, so if we go back to the investigations, one thing that gets my emotions going is when people say, oh yeah, the investigations, no, I've read them, yeah? Because oh, there's my, because this is how it's structured, yeah? There are various paragraphs, and you read a paragraph and you say, I sort of understand that. You read the next one, you're like, what on earth is he on about? What is this? How does this connect to the bottom? Third one, oh, I sort of get how he's, no, I'm completely lost. You could write a PhD thesis, philosophy department, please give me this artistic license, on a paragraph in the investigations, yeah? There's an analytic commentary by Peter Hacker, also Baker. The philosophical investigations is 250 pages long. It's quite short. The analytic commentary, all the volumes, runs to 2,500 pages. And I love something that Peter Hacker does in the analytic commentary. He draws these diagrams of how the paragraphs are connected. So you'll say, so 475 is connected to 476, but that's its point on its own, yeah? 477, that relates back to 472, 473. So it's this wonderful sort of labyrinth that you get to explore, yeah? It's not a textbook laid out. Here are some of my favorite quotes from the investigations. So from the preface, I should like my writing to spare other people I should not like my writing to spare other people the thought of thinking, but if possible, to stimulate someone to have thoughts of their own. Now, look at the sign and let a sound occur to you as you do so. What am I doing here? If a lion could speak, we could not understand him. What is the meaning of a word? Let us attack this question. What is your aim in philosophy? To show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. Here, it is difficult to keep our head above water. We feel as if we had to repair a torn spider's web with our fingers. Some lovely turns of phrase. So you're going through this, and then and then you walk. You can't understand a word of what's happening. You're walking in the mountain, and then you have this aha moment, yeah, followed by the little bit of disappointment after that as well, yeah. So very interesting, this notion of insight versus logical understanding, yeah, something we could have a whole conference on. On its own. Okay, so this idea of attacking a question, this idea of making sure that before we embarking on a quest to answer a question, we should check out the lie of the linguistic topology, check out the lie of the land. So apparently this is, Winnie the Pooh said this to Piglet. He said, Piglet, they've discovered the North and the South Poles, I'm going to discover the East Pole. Yeah? And Piglet says, Pooh Bear, before you do that, just check out the topology there, yeah? If that makes sense. I'm going to find the center of the universe, Yun She Ma, and Ansel and John, if you'd like to query them about why that is not a good question. Yeah? The universe has no center. They're going to tell you about four-dimensional space-time, They're going to speak about balloons expanding, but there's a center to the Milky Way galaxy, there's a center to the local group of galaxies, but there's no center to the universe itself. Yeah? I'm going to suggest that the question or the quest of finding out whether human beings actually have free will is similarly not worth asking or not worth going on. All right, this is a lovely excerpt from a film called Wittgenstein by Derek Jarman. And just this idea of the linguistic topology, yeah? Like having a look at that, this shows a wonderful subtlety in that.
Professor Wittgenstein, you can't know this pain. Only I can.
Are you sure you know? You don't doubt you had a dangerous head?
How could I?
If we can't speak of doubt here, we can't speak of knowledge either.
I don't follow.
It makes no sense to speak of knowing something in a context where we could not possibly doubt it. Therefore, to say, I know I am in pain is entirely senseless.
Lovely, yes, this idea, if you're going to speak about knowledge, immediately doubt needs to be there. This particular issue surfaces in the problem of other minds. I don't know if you know about that. So I know that I have a mind, but I can doubt whether Francesco, it looks like he has a mind, he seems to interact, but it's very possible that he might be a zombie or a robot, yeah? That's just been programmed. How can I know that for sure? And Simon Glendinning in his book On Being with Others, Heidegger, Derrida, Wittgenstein, he says, instead of asking how can we prove that other people have minds, rather ask how do we adopt a picture of ourselves that makes it the skeptical problem arise in the first place. Really interesting, they're taking a step back before jumping in. You guys know about the Copernican turn. Yeah, it's when Copernicus said that the Earth is not at the center of the universe, yeah, that the Earth actually revolves around the sun. Huge upheaval in society. Similarly with the linguistic turn. So Wittgenstein, definitely one of the main figures in that, and someone else I'm going to mention is Ferdinand de Saussure, the father of structuralism, a Swiss linguist. All right. The way that I'm going to explain the linguistic turn is to jump on Rortian terms, anti-representationalism and representationalism. Does anyone recognize the top left-hand person over there? Yeah, a couple of people. That's Sam Harris. The reason that I've used him as the arc representationalist is because when I was originally preparing the talk on free will, he's a radical believer that there's no such thing as free will, okay? And I think that's because of the representationalist picture that he adopts. But here's Sam Harris on free will.
Look at, so then you look at someone like Saddam Hussein, or the worst evil person you could imagine, and you say, well, he's actually unlucky. You know, there, but for the grace of biology, go I. Because if I had that brain, if I had those genes, if I had those influences that gave me those synapses, I would be just like him.
You hear those dominoes falling, yeah? In terms of that physicalist picture. So I'm going to use Sam Harris as my representationalist and Wittgenstein as the anti-representationalist. So the representationalist for me is pre-linguistic turn, anti-representationalist post. So what does the representationalist believe? Around language, that words refer to objects. Yeah? Plato. To understand language is to understand how a name is related to the bearer of that name. The Bible. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. There's an Oxford linguist called Roy Harris who said you cannot underestimate, you cannot underestimate the effect this representationalist paradigm of language had on the evolution of Western thought, culminating in Sam Harris for me. Yeah? John Searle would be another, for me, example of a representationalist.
If you look at the history of Western philosophy, really since the Greeks, one of the persistent errors has been to try to deny the existence of the real world existing independently of the human mind. And the idea that there is a real world that's external to us, it doesn't depend on us for its existence, it's there whether or not we were ever conscious, it was the physical reality was there before any of us was ever existed or was ever conscious, and it will continue to be there long after life and consciousness have ceased from our little planet. Now, that I regard as just absolutely basic. That's a condition of sanity, philosophically speaking.
Representationalist speaking.
That is frequently denied in the history of philosophy. It's instead of making a world, a reality, the final touchstone, everything else is answerable to the world, you make the world itself answerable to our states of consciousness.
I love that clip because when he does this, the touchstone, yeah? And I don't like this clip because he's obviously far more intelligent than I am, but in this gesture about the reality being answerable or contact, you could write 5 PhD theses about whether you use the word answerable or constraint or causal connection there, yeah? There's a lot of delicious nuance, but Searle, for me, unfortunately, just boxes everyone who doesn't take the representationalist paradigm into like a social constructivist type of dustbin that he wished we could throw away. Right, so that's the representationalist. The fundamental idea is that words reach out to reality and name things in the real world. The real world is your starting place, and words name things in that reality. All right, what is the anti-representationalist? That sounds pretty obvious. Yeah? When I listen to Searle, there's a part of me that goes, yes, absolutely. So what does the anti-representationalist say? The anti-representationalists at the bottom, we've got Richard Rorty saying, rationality, thought, and cognition all began when language did. Language gets off the ground not by people giving names to things that they were already thinking about, but by proto-humans using noises in innovative ways. It's one of my favorite phrases from Rorty. Yeah? So we are holding faith with Darwin here. We are clever animals, and language has something that evolved to serve our human needs and purposes. A very Wittgensteinian concept is that of a language game. So this is the idea that within our forms of life, you could crudely say that there's a sociology language game, an economics language game, but there are also language games around giving directions, language games around intimate relationships. There are various forms of life, various activities that we have, and these language games are the touchstone for meanings of words. Yeah? So Wittgenstein says, paraphrasing once again, to ask for the meaning of a word is like asking for the role of a chess piece. The meaning of a word is its use or its role in a language game to help us navigate the world, not by referring to some weird metaphysical reality out there. Okay. Both Wittgenstein and Saussure concur in diagnosing as a major source of trouble the traditional thesis that the meaning of a word is the object for which the word stands. So Roy Harris, very much post-linguistic turn. Okay. I want to chat a little bit more about the representationalist because we want to dive into the notion of a natural kind. So the representationalist says that we can divide words up in terms of natural kinds, and these are the ones that sort of reach through and touch reality. So words like water, gold, or fish, yeah? But then we also have non-natural kinds which are socially constructed. Yeah? Things like bank accounts or bachelors, these obviously depend on our society. All right. So let's dive into the natural kind words. Okay, this is just a quick little comedy break. If you like QI with Stephen Fry.
What conclusion did the great biologist Stephen Jay Gould draw from a lifetime study of fish?
Oh, yeah, they've got any legs.
Feel no love. No, there is no such thing as a fish. Fish has no biological meaning. Biologically speaking, a salmon is more related to, say, a camel than it is to a hagfish. Like, there are lots of things that fly, like a bumblebee flies, a vulture flies, and there are flying lizards. They're not all birds.
No.
But we call things that swim in the sea fish, and actually, biologically, evolutionarily, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other at all. So, after a lifetime study of fish, biologist Stephen Jay Gould concluded that there's no such thing as a fish.
Lovely. So you guys are saying that's biological tax, so that's fine. I mean, that's what science does. It actually shows us, that when we try and reach through to reality, we make some mistakes and we refine that. Okay, but let's have a go with something a little more, another sort of obvious and concrete one, tree, yeah? So thank you, Nokwanda, for having this conversation with me in in the botany department, they start, there's no definite distinction between a tree and a shrub and a bush. They start speaking about phanerophytes and chemophytes and things like that. Let's just stay with this notion of a tree. It feels like it feels like it picks out something out there in reality. All right, so there's the tree. It's referring to tree, representationalist paradigm. If we're talking about a tree, we must be able to speak of the height of the tree. It has extension. Thank you, Professor Nigel Love, the HOD in the linguistics department at UCT, for having this conversation with me. So he said, Philip, okay, so the height of a tree, that's a definite thing out there in the world. Okay, is the height of the tree from the ground or from the roots? Well, Prof, I suppose it depends on what my purposes are in measuring the height of the tree. He says, exactly, and if you're looking at the top of the tree, are you going to measure it in summer or winter if it's deciduous? Oh, that's interesting. Well, it depends, I suppose, on my needs. That's exactly right. And if there's a tree, if you're measuring it in summer, are you going to measure the tree in its resting position or what the tree does when there's a gust of wind? Because the height will change. Oh, wow, okay, so So as soon as we start scratching that surface of what the height is, what this obviously real thing is, immediately we come across that seems to depend on what I need to do with this concept rather than representing something there. And you guys know if we zoom in to the leaf, we're going to find an atom, and we're going to try and say, okay, so the height is the outermost orbital of the electron, and then we say there's actually no such thing as an electron, and then we have suddenly there's no such thing as height at all. So if we're holding face with the anti-representationalist, they're going to say that word didn't point to something or pick out something in a reality out there. We started using it because it was useful for us. Why? Because trees give us fruits, they give us shelter. We can cut them down and make fire. We can make a whole lot of tools from trees. This is the reason that, or where that word tree gets its meaning, from this web of relations. So the meaning of the word is rooted in our form of life. That's the place to look for the meaning of a word. And this idea of this web of relations is essential to structuralism. Saussure famously said the system of differences. The reason a tree is a tree is because it's not a bush, and it's not a shrub, and it's not a flower, and it's not so the place that it occupies is sort of the absence of the other. They all depend on each other in order to have meaning. And let's throw our human needs and purposes on top there as well. So that's the anti-representationalist picture of where to look for the meaning of the word tree. Okay, the twin earth thought experiments. One of the Hilary Putnam posited twin Earth, which is exactly like Earth, okay? And he said one of the peculiarities of twin Earth is that the liquid called water is not H2O, but a different liquid whose chemical formula is XYZ. I shall suppose that XYZ is indistinguishable from water at normal temperatures and pressures. Also, I shall suppose that the oceans and lakes and seas of twin Earth contain XYZ and not water, that it rains XYZ on twin Earth and not water, etc. I'm not going to go into why Putnam put forward this thought experiment, but how it's been used by some representationalists is to say, look, this is the proof that you can't think of water in an anti-representational web of relations way, because if you did that, then water on Earth and water on twin Earth, you would say they're identical, and Putnam's just shown us it's obvious that they're not, that the meaning of the word is bound up with what it's referring to, what it's pointing to, and it's pointing to H2O on Earth and XYZ on twin Earth. So he said, cut it any way you want, meaning ain't in the head. Okay, let's dive in here. This is my little thought experiment. Let's take 2 glasses of water, okay, and we fill them up from the same tap. Is everyone happy that we have the same liquid there? Yes? We have the same liquid in both glasses. What happens if we heat one up? Are they the same liquid? Should we take votes? Who says we still have the same liquid? No, okay. And who feels strong? We do not have the same liquid. Who feels they are different? Okay, we have a couple. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm hoping that you guys are saying yes and no, you silly idiots, because We have a criterion for sameness. They're still mostly composed of the same molecules, but we have a criterion for difference now. Yeah? The glass on the left-hand side, the molecules are moving much faster. We call that temperature. So they're the same and they're different. We have a criterion for difference. Sorry, I wanted to say, is this an important difference? Well, if you're trying to get a tomato sauce stain out of your shirt, it's very important. Yeah? Is it an essential difference to the nature of water? Who's going to decide on that? Excuse me, God, could you please tell us if the temperature of water is, would it make a difference if we said hot water was hotter, cold water was quarter? Yeah? Would then suddenly they became different concepts that carved nature differently? What happens if one of the glasses is from an Evian spring bottle and the other is from the tap? Yeah? Are they the same liquid? Yes and no. Yeah? So is this an important difference? If you're a Constantia housewife, very important. Yeah? Let's have a sip of this water. Okay, so we have a mouthful of water. A mouthful of water is about 18 milliliters. We know 18 mils is 18 grams. We know 18 grams of water. Sorry for the lay people out there. That's about a mole of water, which is about 6,022 times 10 to the 23 molecules. That's 600,000 million molecules. There are more molecules in a mouthful of water than there are stars in the observable universe, and more molecules in your mouth when you take a mouthful of water than all the grains of sand on all the beaches of 1 million Earths. Okay? Just incomprehensible number of molecules. So let's have a look at them. There's some Italian chemists that had a look at what they found in water across Italy. They found 69 different elements. So if you take a sip of water and you take another sip of water from the same glass, and I ask you, is the liquid in the first mouthful the same as the liquid in the second mouthful? Yes and no. Yeah? Because in the first mouthful, there were a couple of 100,000 more calcium atoms, and in the second mouthful, there were about 1 million less sodium atoms, right? And don't forget the hojas, yeah? In every mouthful that you're drinking, different bacterial content. Is this cutting water at the joints here, or, yeah? Let's have a look at the nuclear structure. We know, sorry for the lay people, I'm going to go very quickly here. Oxygen contains 8 protons, but we give different isotopes. So if oxygen has 8 neutrons, we call that the isotope oxygen 16. We get oxygen with 9 neutrons, with 10 neutrons. These are different isotopes. And similarly with hydrogen, you know, we have different isotopes of hydrogen. So when we say water is H2O, yeah, can you see the difficulty? Water, we could be speaking about H2O16 or D2O17. Which one? And if you look at the naturally occurring, these are called isotopologues. That's my word for the month. I love that. That's right, do you know? Isotopologue. Isotopologues of water, all of those occur in water that we find on Earth. So what's happened to H2O now? Yeah? Just a shout out, so you can't see them, my references. They're philosophers of chemistry. This part, yeah, they spell this out beautifully, yeah, that H2O does not cut nature at the joints. Yeah? This is the complexity that we're dealing with. All right? And if we zoom into the water molecules can vibrate, yeah, and they can emit infrared radiation. So if you have two glasses that have different infrared spectra, are they the same liquid or different liquids? Yeah? Depends on your needs and purposes. The molecular physicist is going to say different. Yeah? For all of us, we don't give a hoot what the infrared spectra are. Yeah? Do you want to zoom in a little bit more into the nucleus? And if we look at the nucleons, we know that they can exist in excited states. We know that they can de-excite and emit gamma rays. So if we're looking to say that the water in this glass is the same as the water in this glass, do we have to also compare the gamma ray spectra? Such a delicious rabbit hole to go down. Yeah. If you want to go further, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But yeah. So where do we start cutting nature at the joints? Yeah. When do we start picking out the thing that's really there in reality? So what the anti-representationalist would say is, we've got all these different descriptions of water, yeah? And they're all useful for different purposes. but there's no purpose or there's no meta criterion to say this one is absolutely true. So let me ask the question, and that goes for the same for Putnam's thought experiment. So if I said which sentence is most true, or which sentence is the best representation of what water really is, which of those cuts nature at the joints? Water is wet, water is H2O, water is H2O16, water is excitations of quark and electron quantum fields. Yeah? Anselin, you're not allowed to say the last one. Yeah? All perfectly good descriptions, useful in different scenarios. And to push this right to the end, in the year 2165, they're going to discover darker matter, and they're going to find that it only occurs in water, it binds to water by quantum gravitational effects only around the continent of Australia. And it explains why it makes neural connections happen in a way that explains why people say things like, no worries, mate. And it's finally explained why Australians speak in their strange way because of the discovery of darker matter. Yeah? And a century later, the discovery of darkest matter. Yeah? You guys agreed with me at the end that there's no end to this. Yeah? We're going to constantly come up with new descriptions of the microstructure of water. So the idea that we ultimately are going to land at a final description or find the truth of the reality of water, we can dispense with that idea. Yeah? No end to redescriptions. Okay. I'm sure we're going to run out of time. Yeah, okay. All right, so remember structuralism, anti-representation, and this idea of meaning of a word obtaining. If you're looking for the meaning of a word, look at its relations. Yeah. So here we can see that we have a variety of language games for water. Yeah, a variety of different sort of descriptional language games, linguistic topologies. There's the ordinary ones that we have: wetness, temperature, thirst. We can speak about water at a molecular level. So the molecular physicists, the vibrations, and the chemists, they can speak to each other. There's some overlap there. QFT seems to be, I don't know, like off to the side. So these are all very good descriptions of water that we can make use of. Let's substitute for water human being. How many different descriptions do we have of human beings? Sociological, anthropological, political, economic. Yeah. So at the beginning of the talk, I spoke about a psychological description. And then I mentioned the physical, yeah, or maybe a biological description. There's some overlap there. But there's also political descriptions, etc. So the anti-representationist is going to say, and if you can feel the disappointment coming, yeah, that these are all descriptions that are useful for particular purposes, but none of them cuts nature at the joints and tells us exactly what a human being really is. So there we go. Yeah, the conundrum. We can shrug our shoulders and at this moment. And at this moment, the scientist in me rebels, yeah, and says, no, the psychological description it supervenes on the physical description, or some fancy word. Yeah? The physical description on the left-hand side, that's what's actually happening. Yeah, and the psychological description is some sort of highfalutin, yeah, sure, it's useful for some purposes, but what's actually happening, yeah, with Sam Harris is what's on the left-hand side, yeah? So I'm just going to try and apply some therapeutic balm to myself for thinking that. Well, let's hear from Richard Rorty first about this idea that particle physics is the ultimate, or physics is the ultimate holy grail of truth, yeah?
Confronted with this impasse, the essentialist is tempted to turn for help to natural science. He attempted to say that a sentence like, it is made up of the following sorts of elementary particles arranged in the following ways, gets us inside the object as it truly is. Parenthetically, I confess that I had thought this kind of intuitive physicalism was out of fashion. But when in the 1970s Kripke published his Meaning and Necessity, everybody suddenly began agreeing with Kripke that, yes, it's the elementary particles which are what's really essential to the thing. It was as if physicalism had been lurking in the shadows all the time and just needed a Just needed an opening to come back into fashion.
Okay, I see that we're running out of time. I just want to impress my philosophy colleagues to show that I was going to explain transcendental idealism in 2 slides. Just this idea of Immanuel Kant sort of saved the notion of necessity I'm sure John Searle said of reality, because he said that there's the phenomenal tree, that's the tree that we see, the thing as it appears to us, the thing as it appears to us, but it's actually, there's a thing as it is in itself, the noumenal tree, that's almost sort of filtered through our faculty of sensibility and our faculty of understanding, and then becomes an object for us. And I think Rorty sometimes speak about how this particular picture keeps us tied to this idea that these 2 descriptions are trying to describe the same thing. There's this noumenal human being that we're trying to get in touch with, the true. So only one of them can really be true, or one must be subservient. If there's a paradox, it means that there must be one that we must choose. And this invitation to actually allow that notion of the noumenal, of trying to pierce the veil of reality, to allow that to go by the boards and just think in terms of descriptions. And at this moment, you should go, but if we just have descriptions, if we never, in the word of Searle, touch reality, aren't we in a type of idealism? We're just stuck inside our heads, relativism, To which I will simply say, because we're out of time, if you suffer from anxiety of relativism, please apply some soothing balm of non-reductive physicalism. So Rorty has a chapter in a book where he speaks about you don't have to be a reductionist. You don't have to think that psychology reduces to physics, and you can still be a physicalist. You don't have to, it doesn't entail that you are an idealist or a relativist. So I'll leave it there, and I'll give the penultimate word to Rorty. This is such a lovely way, the humility in pragmatism and in the man himself. I feel like I really love, it comes through this clip.
But once again, you should notice that it would be inconsistent with my own pan-relationalism to try to convince you that the Darwinian way of thinking of language, and by extension the Deweyan pragmatist way of thinking of truth, is the objectively true way. All I'm entitled to say is that it's a useful way, useful for a certain particular purpose. All I can claim to have done in this lecture is to offer you a redescription of the relation between human beings and the rest of the universe. Like every other redescription, this one has to be judged on the basis of its utility for a purpose. So it seems appropriate to end this lecture by turning to the question, for what purpose does the anti-essentialist think that his description of knowledge and inquiry, of human culture, is a better tool than the Aristotelian essentialist description?
You can watch the talk, it's fantastic, but one of the reasons he speaks about is that it dissolves problems like free will. So if you're asking for a reason, you're not going to become an anti-representationalist because that's the truth. You're going to become an anti-representationalist because it's more useful. The scientist in me dies at that. So perhaps I like this as my final slide. To think of, in terms of the scientists that the next generation of scientists, if we're bringing them up as representationalists, perhaps there's some utility in thinking of the purpose of science as discovering truth, that it's approaching, maybe never reaching, but approaching this God's eye noumenal sort of viewpoint. Or it feels like there's also utility in the anti-representationalist scientist that says the purpose of science is to satisfy human needs and purposes of prediction, control, and exploration. And that the limit of science is the limit of the human imagination. And what comes with the anti-representationalist is to be able to shrug our shoulders at the conundrum of free will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Very entertaining talk. Are there questions for Philip? There are not. It's on. Coffee. The mic is on. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, now. Any questions for Philip? Sorry, there is not a microphone here. Let's see if we can do it.
So I have, I'm audible? Yes. I have two questions or slash comments for this. One is about this comparison. So I am pretty much on this side. Because this side has to say that science that humans need essentially, have a certain practical sense. But most of the case, we don't do things for practical sense. We just be curious. We just want to figure out what it is. It doesn't need to really have to serve the society and etc. We just be curious of what it is. Just satisfy our wondering, nature of human mind, etc. So I'm pretty much on that side. Of course, there's certain aspect to serve the purpose and need, etc.
So Rorty, he does address this in a variety of ways, but you would say that curiosity that you speak, I agree completely. So he says that scientists do not like hearing their subject reduced to engineering. We do not like that, which I'm feeling is behind Yinshe's comments. But then Rorty would say the curiosity you're speaking about, another human need.
Okay, so okay, then let me think. I will find you tomorrow. The second thing is the previous slides, which you have shown, the biological and physical, biological and also political. Yes, this one.
Cool.
The later one. Yes. So I interpret this as the following. So I interpret this physical description and biological description as physical reality, and political description and other description, cultural description, etc., as fictional reality. For example, human right. Human right is a cultural description or a fictional reality. Yeah? So if I open your body, I see molecules, cells, DNA, brains, and I break it down, I see molecules, I see atoms. I don't see any right in your body. So that is a fictional reality which superposed on physical description or biological description and etc. So it is a way of society organizing itself. So even though it's a fictional concept, but doesn't matter. As long as you believe it, and she believes it, and I believe it, it works. It's the same as all other political systems and also financial systems, etc. Right? For example, let me just give you a short.
And then we should give somebody else a chance.
I was gonna.
Let me finish up. For example, the money would be the best fictional reality thing one can ever introduce. And interestingly, this whole world just believing one money. That is this little green paper printed in the American Reserve Bank, etc. All of the world believe in that money. Even Islamic State or ISIS, etc. They hate American culture, etc. They hate American people, but they never hate American money. In fact, they love it very much. So, to me, there is a certain layer of fictional reality which superposed on physical reality, where even though it's just an invention, but doesn't matter. As long as you believe it, she believes it, and I believe it, it works. It becomes our social norm.
Yinshe, yeah, fantastic. So this is a wonderful objection, and all I'm going to give you is the controversial answer, yeah? And that Rorty is going to say that distinction, which seems so intuitive to us, between things that exist in reality, when we open a body, we see them, we don't find them. He's going to say, metaphysically speaking, there is no difference between a human right and a liver. Yeah? They both obtain their meaning from the social practices, from the needs and purposes that human beings have. Yeah? You have to sit with that for a long time. When you say it, and as I'm saying it, I'm saying, but that's utterly ridiculous. For me, it's taken a long time to think that could actually make sense, that metaphysically speaking, yeah, we cannot make this hard dividing line between the things that you think are in reality and the things that depend on human beings. For an anti-representationalist, if you listen to more of Rorty, you will hear him give beautifully subtle arguments for why, when it comes to words, yeah, all we have is descriptions. It's descriptions all the way out. There's no there's no penetrating, yeah, into. Yeah, I know it can feel very. Hopefully, I've planted the seed. Yeah, okay.
Any other comments at the back there, please? At the very back. Okay, then we'll come back to.
Trying to figure out how to phrase what I'm thinking of my question. Maybe I might do a good job of it, but I kind of feel like both of these can be true at the same time. So maybe you have these slides where you have like four different just as an image, like four different ways to put it web, whatever.
Yep.
Right. So that's all fine. But I think in reality, what happens is that yes, there's multiple ways, multiple useful ways that you can talk about a subject. But those ways aren't like separate, right? Like they interact, and sometimes they're hierarchical in some way, right? Like for example in physics, if QFT says something, you could have like a higher level description of the same thing, right? Like a thermodynamical description. But and so they're completely different ways of talking about it. And you can derive one from the other. You can't derive the other from the one. If QFT says something, it's correct. I mean, so forgive me for being too representational there. But like if QFT says something, then thermodynamics is going to have to say the same thing. But you could say things with thermodynamic language that you wouldn't just necessarily intuit from QFT, for example. So they can both remain true and both remain useful, and yet you can't. They're not just like totally separate. Is that?
Yeah, that's a beautiful subtlety. I mean, that would be a really interesting place to go down a rabbit hole. Yeah. So I mean, my favorite example is matrix mechanics and the Schrödinger wave equation. The idea that these were equivalent descriptions of quantum physics. Yeah, so there we have two descriptions, and then we find a mapping, yeah? And in that case, it was a direct mapping. Yeah, so there will be places where that is the case, but I would want to argue, like QFT, I just feel you pushing back into, well, what I'm hearing is that QFT is the foundation of everything, yeah? But okay, thanks for doing that, yeah, because I feel like, the other descriptions, this idea of Newtonian's gravity and Einstein's gravity, yeah? So we can recover, or Galilean transformations and relativistic we can recover those, yeah? So there is space for that, but what Rorty wants to insist, or Wittgensteinian wants to insist, is that the Lorentzian transformations didn't get any closer to the truth of how things, they're just more useful, yeah? And it just seems like that's such a silly little distinction to make. Why are you just speaking about use instead of? But it does have the ramifications down then too in terms of metaphysics. If you're saying true, you have at the back of your mind that you are piercing the veil of reality, contacting something that is given. Yeah. And what Rorty or Wittgenstein is saying is all we have is our models. There might be mappings between them, and sometimes they're not. Yeah. But ultimately, we judge them according to their use and their success in that use.
I think there was a question at the very back, the Bocho, remember? And then we can go back to you. And we must not forget about the online audience as well. They might have questions. Please.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Southey.
Johan, how's it?
Most of that went over my head, to be honest. But I just have one thought, kind of separated into two questions. I just want to get your thought on that. The first is, you said that language is noises, maybe you can also say scribblings on a piece of paper, right? But wouldn't you say then that language is like a democratized noise and a democratized set of scribblings that people kind of subconsciously decide on together, right? But regardless of what they decide, so let's say for instance your example of the water, we all kind of decide on this glass of water is water regardless of the chemicals inside of them, specific chemicals inside of them. So kind of the next question is, no matter what you decide collectively, those things already existed before we decided them. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I'm going to try and separate out a little bit. There's a common objection to say that's what John Searle would say. Yeah, when they hear anti-representationists speaking, it's like trees only came into being when proto-humans started going, huh, huh, tree, huh, huh, yeah, and then suddenly. No, if you understand how tree stands in its web of relations, you understand that it is an ancient organism, yeah, that has an evolution. So it's not as though things come into being. So I've lost my train of thought with the original thing I wanted to. But in terms, okay, so maybe that's the one thing I wanted to say, but sorry, just tell me if this answers your question. The other thing that I heard you saying was in terms of the public nature of language. Yeah? That's a really fascinating one because especially with internal states, yeah, this idea that surely something like happiness or these are emotions that are referring to things that are happening in me. That's the reality of what it is, yeah? And I have a privileged access to that, yeah? Almost like I can pierce the veil into my own internal. And there's a famous argument by Wittgenstein called the private language argument, which argues that that's not the case, yeah? That everything is necessarily shared, everything is necessarily public in order for it to have a meaning. So I don't know if that answered your question, though. Cool. I'm not sure. Chat to me after, chat to me in the TV, yeah. Cool, thanks, Jan.
Please.
Hi, Philip. Thanks for a very interesting talk. I didn't know neutrons can be excited. Is that right?
They can indeed, yeah.
I think my neutrons are very excited by it. Very interesting. I just want to nail you down a little bit on your conclusion about free will. So are you saying that it's impossible to know whether we have free will, or what I read you saying is it doesn't really matter whether we have free will, but that free will is a useful concept that we employ when we live in the world?
Thanks, Susan. Yeah. So I would say we have two descriptions, and they're useful for different purposes. And then it's an interesting question of how am I going to try and convince Sam Harris that the notion that I actually have choice is important, yeah? So that's another whole debate to have.
Because he'd say that you're just, it's like a nice, comforting illusion because it's useful to you, but it's not what it's really like. I don't
Yeah, no, nice. Yeah, so I would throw that back at him in the sense that, so he's accusing me of inventing something for my own needs and purposes to feel cuddly, yeah? And then the whole Rortian response would be to say that you have posited reality out there as this absolute thing as your blankie, yeah, that you're holding on to. You need that God's eye viewpoint, yeah, which is why I feel like the anti-foundationalist is such an interesting thing psychologically for people to engage with. So I would throw that back at him and say, there's a hidden need and purpose in your demanding that there is this thing called reality. Yeah.
Any more questions? Here. And then we come here to the front, and then we can go to the online audience. Yeah, please.
Thanks, Philip. I find the talk interesting because I've always been anti-essentialist, but I've never been tempted by any sort of anti-realism or anti-representationalism because of that. I've never quite understood the link between the two. I wanted to also ask you, so take a lot of the examples seem to relate to things like vagueness, which we normally understand as a language phenomenon. The classic examples, someone's bald. So we would say, well, we clearly can see cases where someone's bald. We can clearly see cases where someone's not. And then there's vagueness in between. And that's true of pretty much all language outside of purely mathematical terminology, that you will have these vagueness cases. And your tree example was a lot like that, right? But it seems to draw from the fact that you can have some vagueness cases. It seems to jump from there to the fact that there's not a fact of the matter. Whereas in, say, take for instance, baldness case, it's very clear, some cases someone's bald, some cases they're not, but a language is not precise to, for each given state in the world, split everything into bald or not. And it seems to be a big thing to, out of a sort of language glitch, draw a metaphysical conclusion.
I'm going to take this advantage, JP, to ask you a question that I want to discuss later. Yeah? So Okay, first of all, just to defend myself, I haven't tried to make a coherent argument here. Everything I feel like is just a little throwing of a seed, yeah? And I hear you, and the place that I struggle the most with Rorty, it's really lovely that you say the anti-essentialist, is because he's going to say something like the way that we avoid being idealists is that we still have a causal connection to the world, yeah? So there's a constraint, but we can never be, the world, we can never use the world as justifying. You can never use the world as that being answerable to the world. And I want to say, but Rorty, if you're talking about having a causal connection to the world, so you're making sure that we don't disappear into a Berkeleyan idealism, if you're speaking about causality, that means that you must be able to give more of a story there. And when I scratch that, it seems to be something like he's only using the word causal in the most deflationary sort of sense, yeah? So that you can't make a story of that, but yet there is that connection, but it's not a connection in the sense of there being this metaphysical thing that we're trying to represent. And I really struggle with that still. Yeah, this notion of that when Searle did that touchstone, and then he used the word answerable. Yeah, and Rorty's going to say you cannot use that as the idea of being answerable. There's the myth of the given. There's no givenness to us from the world, but there's some notion of constraint somehow. And I still get iffy around that. I'd love to chat about that further. Thanks.
That's interesting. I read Rorty a long time ago, and I ended up concluding there's a rule in philosophy for each philosopher. There's a complete opposite philosopher, and Rorty is that for me.
Nice. Thanks for covering.
So there was another question in the here. Sorry, here in front, and then we go to Donovan. Yeah.
The antiparticle.
I guess grand unification theory, useful principle, maybe not true. I guess I'll ask the question too. We can look at this as from a very kind of, we can generally divide between, okay, we're still within this framework. You said you can still have a lot of very useful distinctions between, okay, we're here in the realm of the empirical sciences and in the realm of the social sciences. We can think of them as kind of language games, but the family, shall we say, of scientific language games has a sufficient level of interconnectedness in their ability to be like, okay, they need to be internally consistent. And grand unification theory seems to be the kind of the great jewel at the end of the road that we're supposed to reach. Do you think there are maybe limitations to this kind of thinking that it's maybe, it's very useful to think in terms of a grand unification theory in the goal of integrating all our strange scientific language games. But what about what happens when do we start scratching the kind of the barrier of, well, we can't really be thinking like this anymore?
When it stops being useful, yeah. So it's interesting you use the word true, a very big word in pragmatism, yeah. That's the big, for us, true, for a scientist, true is when you finally corresponding to the reality, yeah. That's true. For a pragmatist, for Rorty, Davidson, they're going to say true is a compliment we give a statement when it has survived all its criticism, yeah. True does not reach through the veil and say you finally corresponded. Yeah. But just in terms of this internal coherence, so I was so excited to include this cartoon, and then I had to leave it out. But I was going to quote my quantum field theorist friend Will Horowitz, who said that when we think about an electron traveling from point A to point B, yeah, we can't really think, if we call that electron Bob at A, yeah, and Bob travels to B, there it is actually, yeah. So I don't know if you can see that.
You can share the screen again, Phil.
Okay. So this notion of being coherent anyway, yeah? So if you speak about coherence, even wave-particle duality, yeah? This idea that we have a wave description and a particle description, that's completely paradoxical, and yet they are useful for different purposes. Yeah? A lovely physical example. The electron, if you see the cartoon, Will convinced me that we can't think of Bob as going from left to the right-hand side. If we measure Bob at the left-hand side and we measure an electron on the right-hand side, we cannot claim that we see Bob again, yeah? Because a whole lot of stuff could have happened in between, depending on how small we make our time interval, yeah? Bob could have been annihilated, could have created a little mini, yeah, big black hole, whatever can happen in between. So what in terms of this coherence, when I want to push back strongly in the cartoon, yeah, your sales are great, you're punctual and well-liked, but I'm concerned about your object permanence issues. Object permanence is something we take a long time to get right, yeah, when we are 1-2 years old. And it feels like quantum field theory is saying you actually have to let that go now. Yeah? Love that.
Let's go to Donovan to see if there are questions from the online audience.
So I feel like we're really over time, though.
That's fine, it's fine. We almost...
So people... Okay.
Maybe a few online questions and then we wrap up.
We only have one question here from DJ Prakash. Water and air gives us two different worlds of sensations. From the fluid's perspective, there's only one called density. And from the solid's perspective, you read it word for word. You make two worlds apart to our sensations and experiences, but from fluid's point of view, there is no difference except density by 833 times. So we cannot swim in air, but aeroplanes do. What is the philosophical implication of this scenario?
JP? I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to relate that to the talk. I mean, I think I want to say something like, there's a word that's used a lot in philosophy, philosophy of science, emergence. Yeah? So this idea that you can't find the wetness of water in the molecule itself. Yeah? So then someone like Sean Carroll will say, so this is an emergent property that comes. But then this is very mysterious. Yeah? It's almost like consciousness, big one. Yeah? Consciousness is this emergent property where stones to plants to insects, is a cockroach conscious? Is a lizard conscious? Is a mouse? Where does consciousness suddenly emerge? Where's this thing that emerges? So from an anti-representationist perspective, that emergent property is simply another language game, another collection of descriptions that we find useful. That's it. Yeah? The whole mystery of emergence solved just by adopting a particular picture of linguistic topology, yeah? How language games work. And this is a big one for consciousness. Yeah? We've got a whole lot of scientists looking for this object called consciousness, or what emerges, the neural correlates. And the Wittgensteinians are saying consciousness is a word that we use, yeah? That we have a particular use for, and it only comes up in our form of life because we have notions of self, selfhood, personality, I, intention, will, all of those things. Yeah? That language game is where consciousness gets its foothold, not in the realm of subatomic particles, just like wetness. Thanks.
Okay, and on that note, let's